Good evening. I'm Bob Bazans, and I'm an alcoholic. Sober through the grace of God and AA since the 10th of December, 1967, and for that I'm very grateful. Boy, that Sandy Beach was a heck of a man. He just, not so much the last 2 years because he was in such pain, but the 8 years before that, he just put his program into another gear. And he was, he never liked me saying this, but for my money, he was our Chamberlain. And he was sharing things with a clarity that few, if any of us could approach. So that was literally, for those last years, the most enjoyable thing I did in AA was do those weekends with Sandy. And I miss him. I can't believe, as you get older, you just can't. If I went through my phone and took out all the people who have died, I think I could remove about 25% of the people in my phone. It's just amazing. I started drinking when I was a freshman in high school. 4'11", 95 pounds, second smallest kid in my class. Had a big mouth. I was always trying to compensate for my physical stature, I guess. I went to high school at a military academy on a college campus, and we drank in high school like most people drink in college. We wore uniforms. It was a pretty serious ROTC deal. Of the six closest of us in high school, four of us are members of Alcoholics Anonymous, two of our wives. All the men have over 45 years of sobriety, and we've all been married 50 years. I mean, those are the most unusual statistics. But our parents were those Second World War people that worked hard, played hard, and drank hard. I mean, they made life look attractive, and we thought we were copying them. I don't think we did a very good job. But by the time I finished high school, my drinking problem was a loud conversation in our home. I'm one of 7 kids. My father was my hero, and we had a great family, still do. All my brothers and sisters, I love them. 3 of us of the 7 are in AA. So we had kind of the Irish flu. And I had a chance to go away to school. I took that chance. I thought I'd get away from my father and the police as an authority figure. I thought my drinking would normalize. It didn't. And I drank my way out of the University of Notre Dame, middle of my senior year. I was the class drunk. It's kind of hard to be a class drunk in a large university, but I think I prevailed. I look back at that some years early in my sobriety. I was asked to go down to Notre Dame and give an AA talk. And I asked Frank Milos to come with me. And I went down there, and it was really interesting for me to walk that campus and to see how young I was. I mean, I've always compared myself to older people, but it was amazing. I did not have anywhere near the experience intended for someone down there. I was due to be commissioned, so I had to get a medical release from the Army. The medical release I got was for alcoholism. I was diagnosed an alcoholic, I don't know, when I was 17, 18 years old. That just seems stupid. I just couldn't put that word together with myself. But I had a psychiatrist that they were having me see, because once or twice a year I'd end up with a car accident or arrest or some sort of semi-life-threatening sort of thing, and they were wondering why this was going on. I came back home and I finished school at a local university. When I finished school, my dad asked me to leave home. He said, I love you, or we love you, but we don't know what the hell to do with you. And armed with my degree and my freedom, I went out and I got a job at a liquor store. It's important to use your gifts. And I worked at the liquor store for almost 6 months. You have little moments in your life. One morning I was drinking and making deliveries in the delivery truck, or kind of like a station wagon. And I pulled out of a home that I just delivered booze to at about 11 o'clock in the morning. And a little girl on her bicycle came behind the truck, and I knocked her down, and she was under. I did not hurt her, but I was scared to death. She was scared to death. I got out of the truck. She's under the back, between the wheels and the bumper. I picked her up in my arms and I asked her where she lived. She pointed down the alley, and I walked down the alley with this little girl, and she pointed, and the house she was pointing at was next door to the house that I lived in for a dozen years. And the neighbors started to come out, and I'm standing with this little girl that I could very easily have greatly harmed. And it was just a moment. How in heaven's name did you get from where you started to where you are right now? That's a scary moment in my life. I've had a number of them. So I quit that job, or I got fired, not because of that, but other things. And then I went over to Minneapolis and took a job as a waiter. I'm living kind of on Skid Row. I'm shacked up with people that I work with. You know, Dr. Seuss, the child author, those are actual photographs of people I live with during the last year of my drinking. I'm drinking a fifth a day. I'm working as a waiter. I go in about, 10:30 and work from 10 to 2. At 2 to 4, I go to a bar and drink. At 5:30, I go back for the evening, and I got a half pint in my back pocket. And I was the world's worst waiter. No one knew where I was, which is just fine. I'm kind of biding my time, waiting to see what the draft board's going to do with me. And I finally got accepted to officer candidate school. And when I went in, they lost my file. So they had me take the physical again. And they failed me for a hearing problem. I mean, just, the grace of God, I didn't have to go to Notre Dame. I got fired as a waiter before that. And I went back and asked my family. I had no place to go. I had no money. Went back and asked my family if I could move back in the house. They allowed me to move back in the house. I was as tired of being the family jerk as they were of having me be the family jerk. When I moved back in the house, I made a really full court press of trying to shape up. And, now that I don't have to go to Vietnam, I got a job as a trainee with a manufacturing concern. I got back together with Linda, who I'd gone with for a couple of years and broken up with for, 6-7 months. I bought my first car and I thought, hey, I'm going to be a grown-up. Only I couldn't quit drinking. Just before I went back to my senior year at Notre Dame, I was beaten up, robbed, rolled, pistol whipped, shot at, thrown out of the second story of a hotel. Ended up in the state of shock, taken to a psych ward in the hospital. My family was not going to let me go back to school, but I talked my way out of that, and they let me go back. And I stayed sober for about 2 months. And I thought during that time I proved two things to myself. Number one, drinking was, I could quit. So I'm not an alcoholic. Number two, everybody's telling me my biggest problem is drinking. I quit drinking, and I didn't all of a sudden become what I thought everybody was telling me I become. I didn't become a good student, and I was still a jerk. And so now I'm engaged to be married. I got this job, and now I'm the company drunk. I'm in a department of engineers and a research department. I was in engineering at Notre Dame. And I just couldn't quit drinking. And I'm sleeping off my hangovers in the dark room. I'm used up my sick leave in the first 2 months at work. And finally, one day I quit that job, and I got a job selling adding machines. And I had that job about 5 or 6 weeks, and I went out on a 4-day drunk, and I woke up in a Thursday in July of 1967, and that was my moment, a hug in the toilet doing my morning exercises. I was as disgusted with myself as I could possibly be. And I called AA. I got the old timer down at the central office, and he called a couple of guys, and he came back on and said, could you meet a couple of guys at this restaurant cafe at 5:30? I said, yeah. And we chatted a little bit. I hung up, and I didn't know if I had a job. I didn't know if my fiance was talking to me. Linda was talking to me. And I didn't know if my family was going to let me live at home until I was married. But I kind of cleared those things up. And then I thought maybe I overreacted when I called AA. But I wanted to go see what an alcoholic looked like. So that's what got me to go to the cafe. I was 23, and I sat down in the booth with these two guys. One guy had 6 months and one guy had 6 years. and they told me their stories. I have been in front of every kind of help that a young person could get. Doctors and religious people and lawyers and judges and psychologists, psychiatrists, proctologists. I mean, I had every kind of help that a person could want, but I'd never talked to another person who had a drinking problem. And these two guys, in the matter of 45 minutes, changed my life. I could have walked out of there and said, I don't want to do what you're recommending, but I could not have walked out of there without knowing that what those men shared with me about their lives was genuine. Then I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that night. I drank twice after that evening. Once after 30 days, I was on a business trip to the West Coast, and I stayed sober 1 week and drank the next. And then Linda and I were married, and I had almost 3 months of sobriety, and we went to Mexico, and I drank on my honeymoon, which I think I had planned subconsciously. Must have. And I had my last drink on the airplane on the way home. Turned myself into my sponsor, and I just said, okay, I buy it. I'm an alcoholic. But if I'm an alcoholic and AA works, I got about a half a dozen other things that are tearing my life apart. And if AA works, those things ought to go away, and it might take a year. It might take 54 years is what the heck it might take. And my sponsor, you talk about seconds, and Norm help you seconds and inches. My sponsor was the 12-step champion of this very large AA group. It was in a bar, an old bar, and we had upstairs and downstairs. And so we had meetings every day of the week. And my sponsor was the most active 12-stepper of anybody. He got sober in 1954. Second World War vet, lost half his crew in a bomb disposal unit in Italy. And I got to be his wingman. And the reason I got to be his wingman, my grandmother worked with his wife at a dairy co-op. I mean, how cool is it that the man who literally shaped my sober life, who everything that I've ever done in AA was done by copying and following Warren around. I got assigned to me. It was absolutely, and his wife got to be my wife's sponsor. And so for the next 43 years, this man and I were bonded very strongly. In Minnesota at that time, and even today, almost all the meetings are closed step discussion meetings. I never talked at my group for the first 25, 30 years. We only had one open meeting a month, and we had outside speakers. The rest of the time we had, if we had a meeting, Steve would give the step, and then we'd break up in two, and we'd finish the meeting with a discussion on the step and how it operated in our lives. So we spent a lot of time on the steps. And so I got a pretty good grounding in the steps. I didn't get a real good sense of my defects of character during my first year. My first year, I was kind of like on a honeymoon. I enjoyed AA since the moment I walked in the front door. It's been easy, it's been easy for me to stay. It's been hard for me to do the work, but it's been easy for me to stay because of my affection and my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. But my second year, one by one, I started to get my significant unmanageabilities and defects of character handed to me. I had trouble getting to work. I had trouble staying at work, and I had difficulty working at work. Other than that, I was a pretty good worker. I spent more money than I made. If you do that over a long period of time, you end up in debt. I just want to report that to you. My wife and I started to have children in our early years, and I was not a very helpful husband. I was overly active in Alcoholics Anonymous. My wife was an RN, and she was pulling double duty. She was doing almost all the child raising, and she was working full time as an RN. And I had all these defects of character, and none of them made my first inventory. My first inventory was kind of like an art project that your mother put on the refrigerator. It included all the things that I was deeply ashamed of and were secret to me. And so to that extent, it was actually kind of effective. but it wasn't very insightful in terms of the causes and conditions as we looked in the steps. In those days, we were not super big with the book. Later, I mean, we are now, and everybody who sponsors people takes them through the book. But when I was there, you didn't get taken through the book. They helped you with 4 and 5, and they helped you with 8 and 9. But the other steps were, we used the book somewhat, but not word by word with your sponsor. Your sponsor was, as I say, with 4 and 5 and 8 and 9. So these gambling issues, money issues, work issues, parenting issues, husbanding issues, by the time I'm 5 years sober, I really thought that if you got me sober, I'd be okay. When I came in AA, I had a wall built up between you and me, and the thinking that went on behind the wall said, you like me, but you only like what it'll let you see about me. If you could see everything about me, you wouldn't like me. I don't like me. But I started to tear the wall down when I called AA. I continued to tear it down in conversation with my sponsor. I tore it all the way down when I did my 5th step. And I made a discovery. And the discovery was that I'm not unique. My personality may be unique, but not my illness, behavior, feelings, and experience. And I started to have a sense of hope that would work for you could work for me. And then I'm in AA, and I started to have problems that I didn't want. I was kind of the class, everybody thought I was the youngest guy in the group for a number of years. And I was, because of my sponsor and all the 12-step work I did, I had a pretty good reputation in AA. It's about the only place in my life I had a good reputation. And I'm just getting upset with myself. This is a story of my life. I'm a guy who doesn't finish anything. I've got great examples, and brick by brick, I built the damn wall back up, sober and Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you very much for helping my drinking problem, but stay out of my marriage, stay out of my parenting, stay out of my money, stay out of my gambling, stay out of my work issues. Brick by brick, I built that wall back up. So I was kind of isolated, and I'm, and because I'm so active and I'm starting to talk and I'm starting to sponsor people, people thought I was still doing quite well. And so I'm back being a phony, and I'm back. My mother always said, "You're not very bright, Bob. Dress well." And it was kind of, so I looked good on the outside, but I tell you, I was a suit. There wasn't much going on that was effective. And by the time I'm in my 7th year, I'm really in trouble. I'm not thinking about drinking, but I'm thinking about putting a gun on my mouth. I'm tired of, I was a guy, of the 12 of us that went down to Notre Dame for my high school, I had the highest test scores. I was the only one who didn't finish. In a capsule, that would have been the story of my life in early sobriety and in my alcoholism. And I was getting really sick and tired of being supposedly having ability and not being able to use it effectively. And finally, out of desperation, 7.5 years sober, I went back through the steps for the 3rd time. First step, powerless and unmanageable, no brainer. What shocked me is I had lost the 2nd step. I believed it for us, but I didn't believe it for me, because I'm almost 8 years sober and my life's going backwards. I'm on the down escalator going up, and it just, nothing's working, and I'm tired. And I did the 3rd step on my knees with my sponsor. We didn't do that much in those days, but I started to hear people in California talk about it, and I didn't want to. This time I wanted to dot the I's and cross the T's, and so I did it with my sponsor. A little awkward, but it was a good experience. And then I did my 4th step, and I told my sponsor, I did the previous 2 5th steps with clergy, which is what we did in those days. And but this one, again, because of people mostly on the West Coast that were using their sponsors, I wanted to do it with my sponsor. And I said, I'm going to do my 5th step. And I said, I think I'm ready to do anything you recommend that I do. I said, I feel like I'm dying of thirst lying next to a lake. I said, I know what to do. If you came to my house with my issues, I think I could give you a fairly good recommendation about what to do with the steps. I just either won't or can't do it. I am so bloody sick and tired of can't or won't do it that I could just spit. And as a result of that, I really think I'm as ready as I've ever been to follow some direction to get the heck out of this manure pile that I've built up for myself. And I did my fifth step with them. And when I was down my fifth step, my sponsor was a mailman. And he said, Bob, you've got a lot of issues about work, money, success, and failure. I want you to find a psychologist that works with business people. I want you to go start a conversation with that guy about your life. And then I want you to bring that conversation back to me so we can recontextualize it in AA. And I did not want to go outside help. It made me feel like I didn't have a very good program. Hello. So I get this psychologist and he wants to get my parents involved. I said, I'm not getting my parents involved. I said, I'm 30 years old and my parents have been over involved in my life. If you can't help me, get me another psychologist. He said, well, I want your wife involved. I thought, oh, crap. When your wife's involved, there's just a lot of information that comes into the room and that's unnecessary. And it's a little embarrassing and it's a little awkward. And I think it interrupts the flow of conversation. But he insisted and I said, okay. And he wanted my children involved and they were young. And they weren't involved every week, but I agreed. And so we start going to this guy and we're into it about 6 or 7 weeks. I think we're going twice a week. I'm not sure. Either once or twice a week. And I'm explaining to this guy that my company is probably going to go bankrupt. My business partner is 56 years sober. 57 years sober. 57 years sober. And so between us, we have 110 years of sobriety. We've been partners 52 years in the real estate business. So this company, I'm in the real estate investment company, and I'm a salesman who doesn't make sales calls. I just fake, I lie about, I don't fake. I lie about the sales activity that I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm telling this guy that my company's going to go broke, and I'm busting my ass 2 or 3 hours a day. And he looks at me and he says, why are you so afraid of failing? I actually wanted to strike him. I'm not a fighter, but I felt like he punched me. I mean, he just went absolutely to the core of my soul. And I explained, I said, I said, I'm going to lose everything I have. I lived in this town all my life. My reputation is going to go to crap. I'm going to have to have my name in the paper. I'm going to file bankruptcy. I'm going to lose everything I have. And he looked at my wife and I said, you're a doctor. That's not a big deal for you. You just take your little sign, walk down the hall, pound it on another door. And 6 months later, you're making $100,000. I'm going to lose everything I have. And he looked at my wife and he said, if Bob lost everything he had, would he lose you? And my wife said, no, wouldn't lose me. He asked the same question to the kids. The kids said, no. If you can't lose, you can't play. I'm a guy who dressed well, looked good, and didn't have anything going on. I just was I don't know if I was so wired into the easier, softer way. What I discovered in that man's office that day was fear. Now, in theory, I should have done 3 fear inventories. I didn't. We weren't as good with the book as we are today. Fear had to do with snake dogs and tall buildings. But what I discovered is I'm afraid of being a husband. I'm afraid of being a dad. I'm afraid of work. I'm afraid of failure. And interestingly enough, I was afraid of success. And 2 weeks later, I'm in my living room after a really crappy day. I left work. I got to work late. I left early. I got in a backgammon game. I won. So in addition to these other problems, I got a gambling problem. 4 or 5 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. I'm making $500 a month playing backgammon, and thought I wanted to be a professional backgammon player. And I got in the backgammon game. I won $500. I missed dinner. I missed the AA meeting. I came home and I got in a fight with my wife. one of those days you'd like to have videotaped and sent to the General Service Office to show what 8 years of sobriety can do. Can you imagine how badly I felt about myself? I just almost couldn't stand it. And I said to myself that I had tried as hard as I know how to try to clean my act up, and I had failed. I don't think I would have been able to say those exact words to myself before that. And for some reason that seemed okay. And I got down on my knees and I took the 6th and the 7th step of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous at a depth that I had not ever thought to take before. The 6th step said, we humbly ask him, we're entirely ready to have God remove our defects of character. The 7th step said, we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. I had spent 7.5 years trying to get rid of them. I don't have the power. I have the responsibility, but I'm the pipe, not the well. It happens through me, not by me. A doctor doesn't heal. A doctor creates an aseptic environment and creates an atmosphere in which healing can take place and God heals. A farmer doesn't grow. He creates an atmosphere in which a fertile soil creates an atmosphere in which growth can take place and God grows. And we don't change. It looks like we change, but we create an atmosphere in which change can take place through the taking of the steps. And interestingly enough, 6 and 7 are very primary in that process. And when we create that atmosphere internally, that spiritual environment, God changes us. And that night, 4 of the major problems that I was dealing with stopped. I turned the finances over to my wife. I gave her the checkbook and I went on an allowance. And I did that for 4 or 5 years without any outside money. As time went on, when we became more financially stable, I had my own sources of outside money, but for those initial years, I did not. I started dating my wife every Friday night. It was maybe the best thing we've ever done for our marriage. It was a real, live, dangerous date. No one else went out on it, and we didn't just go to a movie. We went out to dinner, and it was very cool. I stopped gambling that night. I made appointments with my sponsor about making sales calls and going to work and staying at work and working at work. And I spent thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours trying to learn how to be a better parent. My life changed like it was on a lazy Susan. It was just one of the most extraordinary things. It wasn't immediate. Well, it was in many ways immediate. I mean, my attitude, I became more the man that my wife wanted in that evening. It was just extraordinary, and it was easy. I wanted to be that man in all those ways. The other thing I did is I hired someone to get me up at 5:30 in the morning, and I went to 6 o'clock mass for 6 days a week. Extremes. I'm getting up at 9 before this, and now I've got a woman calling me who was his part-time secretary. And after mass, I'd go in the back of the church and I'd pray to God, because my business is still crappy. And I said, God, give me your mind. And I'll be damned. He did. I didn't even realize it, but all of a sudden, the guy that wasn't making sales calls was making sales calls. I made sales calls an AA activity. I always did AA. I didn't do work. And I was the guy who all of a sudden started to analyze the investment deals that we were doing with the real estate we were buying. And I became effective. And I look back on that, and for the longest time, I would not have said those words in an AA talk, because I don't think I really realized what had happened to me until, I knew things were better and I knew things were different. But I look back at it and I really think it was a transformation. I think it was, from a second surrender, God empowered me and gave me an effectiveness that by myself, I did not have. He took my intelligence and allowed me to apply it in a way that made a difference, in a way that was effective. Where else in the world could you ever have gone to have your life rearranged in such a dramatic and wonderful way? Chuck Chamberlain, I remember when he had those, the a new pair of glasses tapes. And he talked about when he was he was already sober a couple of weeks, I think, and he had a bad neuropathy. And he was walking into his first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's standing across the street from this church, looking at the church, and he walked across the street and he walked up the stairs, and there was a guy greeter at the door. And the greeter said, "Are you looking for something?" And Chuck said, if it would interest you, sir, I'm looking for sobriety. He said the guy's face lit up. He said, little did I know I was about to enter a door in which I was going to find out how to live. I came to learn how not to drink, and I stayed to learn how to live. That's our story, isn't it? I mean, we come in with a drinking problem and find out we have a thinking problem. And, so my life has been, Linda and I have 3 kids. I'm 53 years sober. She's 53 years in Al-Anon, almost 54. And it's just, she's been the greatest partner a guy could ever want. My life is terrific. It is, I'm almost embarrassed about how, because it's almost as if it's been kind of handed to me as a result of this wonderful program. I have learned how to live, and I stopped digging the hole. It is kind of extraordinary. 3 of our kids had been in AA, 2 are still sober, and 1 has decided he doesn't have the issue, and he looks like he's doing okay. Of the 7 siblings, 3 of us are in Alcoholics Anonymous. If there was anything, because I'm an old guy and everybody are tempted to ask old guys about, what do they think the most important thing is? I think the most important thing in the program is not being self-directed. I really think that it is, and that's subtle. We can become self-directed in a negative sense, and we don't even know that we're self-directed. One of the dangers that those of us that are sober a while have is we start to compliment ourselves on our sobriety. People just start assuming that if you've got 5, 10, 15, 20 years of sobriety, when they look at you, you look like you got everything put together. So after this wonderful surrender that I had, I started making a lot of money. And in the mid-'80s, they changed the Tax Act, and over a period of about 3 years, I lost everything I had. I lost a lot of money, and I was broke. And I'll tell you, when I went broke, now I could make that sound like it was a bad event, but God helped me in the program. Helped me. I was a basket case. It wasn't like, changing my clothes. It was like tearing the skin off my body. It never occurred to me that if I made all this money, that I'd lose it, and especially lose it all. So I'm, I don't think God had the real estate collapse to teach me a lesson, but I think in the real estate collapse of the mid-'80s, I had to learn the lesson about who I was with money and who I was without money. So the other thing, if someone said, what else is important? I'd say to learn that you don't want to change. And I think if I asked everybody to raise their hand, which I'm not asking, and I said, how many of you would like to get rid of the things in your life that don't work, that are causing you trouble? I think almost all of us would raise our hands. But the fact is, this is one of the enigmas in the 6th and the 7th step. If the 6th and the 7th step work and AA works, why are we 6, 7, 8, 10 years sober? And I think the surrender experience I had at 7 or 8 years, I felt horrible about having that. But the fact is almost, it seems to me that almost all of us have a come to Jesus session somewhere between 5 and 15 years. You just don't get it done all the first time through. And the second time, when Bill wrote the 12 and 12, and he talked about deepening and broadening the relationship that people have with the steps, because he was observing longtime sober people that were struggling with depression and anger and other issues. And so if it works and we're willing to change, why do, most of us, the serious issues in our lives, they're not weeks old. Hell, they're years old. And it isn't like, I'm not trying to, but I mean, the question is if AA is effective, why do we still have some of these significant issues? And I think that this is the big boy, big girl sort of issue. Are you in the game all the way? I really think that was the question that, God asked me when at 7.5 years of sobriety, are you going to come all the way in and sit all the way down? There just are some issues that we don't want to change, and we think we want to change. But the fact is that most of the really significant, difficult defects of character are bound in our subconscious. Intellectually and consciously, we want to change. We don't want the damage that's going on. But when push comes to shove, we're conflicted. We want to change and we don't want to change. And that's why the surrender experience is so unbelievably important to the process to reduce the ego enough to get it the hell out of the way, or reduce it enough to be able to answer the bell when God says, over here, come on, it's time. Let's get on this. And then we can take those issues that we have in our life, which all of us have, which I have. We can take those issues and elevate them from a complaint to a piece of business. And that is, and all of us know the difference between a complaint and a piece of business. We train the people in our lives. I mean, if you really have a lot of unmanageability going on, you train your buddies. Look, we're not, we'll talk about the steps, we'll talk about the tradition, but you stay out of my face and I'll stay out of your face. Deal? Bad deal. I have the opposite deal with my friends in AA. If I get out of line, please grab me by the collar nicely and have a conversation with me that tells me that you think I'm in difficulty. The program works unbelievably well, and yet we tend to rely on our ongoing sobriety and congratulate ourselves for the ongoing success that we have, and yet we're still dragging some fairly significant things, financially, sexually, maritally, children-wise. I mean, life is pithy. I mean, it really is, difficult. And there's some issues that we do. And I think that some of us I've had 3 sponsors die now. My first sponsor died at 43 years of sobriety. Then I had Dick Martin for 5 years. This is a wonderful man from Bellevue, Nebraska. And then I had Howard Polmans for 5 years. And I sponsored Howard for 5 years. And in the last 5 years of his life, we sponsored each other. And today I have Tim Hyland, who's a wonderful guy from Louisville. And I asked Tim, I've got 53 years of sobriety. Tim had 29 at the time. And I don't know, God kept putting Tim's name on the list in front of me. We were not super close friends, but I've always admired him. I thought we had a lot of similarities, and it's been a wonderful relationship. And the biggest thing that I wanted was the same thing I had with Howard. He's still active with the steps. I want to have someone have a conversation with, and to be able to talk, not like a step Nazi, but a conversation about inventory, and a conversation about love, and a conversation about how I'm doing as a husband and how I'm doing as a dad. And we're both practitioners, and we're talking to each other like we're practitioners. And I've got that with Tim, and I just treasure it. And that is the sort of thing that I try to maintain with my sponsees, is that we're practitioners. And, my obligation is not so much the letter of the step, but I think if I have anything to offer in the process of sponsorship, it is being able to have a conversation with someone and include the principles of the steps in the conversation while we're having that conversation. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I owe my life to Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a good marriage, and I have 3 kids that 3 boys who I love so much that it'd be difficult to explain. And I wouldn't have any of those things if it wasn't for you and for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you.